Bonjour, and welcome to another episode of Métis Time Capsule. I'm your host, Alexandria Anthony. Today, folks, we discuss the mysterious disappearance of Métis leader and activist Jim Brady. James Patrick Brady, better known, of course, as Jim Brady, was born March 11th, 1908, and disappeared June 7th, 1967. And it truly is a mystery on par with the disappearance of course, Amelia Earhart. And Jim Brady really spent his entire life fighting, really fighting uh, for and working with the Métis people. And again, he was born March 11th, 1908 in Lake St. Vincent, of course, Alberta, which is a province in Canada. His father was Irish, James Brady Sr., and his mother, Philomena Brady. Her maiden name is Garneau, and she was one of the first Métis registered nurses in that area. And Philomena's father was Lawrence Garneau, and he was involved with Louis Riel and the Métis resistances of 1870 and 1885. So, really interesting to note in regards to Jim Brady's parents and a little bit of background information there. And here's something interesting. Did you know that Lake St. Vincent near St. Paul de Métis was the largest Métis community in Alberta, and that had become exclusively Métis after the year 1885. And by 1909, however, due to an influx of white settlers, some people call them squatters, for a lack of a better word, St. Paul de Métis was disbanded as a Métis settlement and was opened up to general settlement. And Jim Brady's maternal grandfather, Lawrence Garneau, as well as other relatives, helped raise him after his mother died. And from Garneau, Jim learnt the roots of the Métis struggles in the Northwest. And also, this is a fascinating story as well. Did you know that 5 Northwest Mounted Police arrived at his grandmother's house to arrest her husband in 1885? Can you just imagine that? And they were looking for a letter to Garneau from Louis Riel, and his grandmother had been doing laundry when they arrived, and she, quick thinking, really, she put the letter and other documents in the wash tub and destroyed them by just vigorously rubbing on them on the washboard until they literally disintegrated. So I can just see that visual image in my mind. His grandmother taking documents and letters and just rubbing the heck out of them on the washboard until they just literally disintegrated. The history and the composition of Brady's hometown of St. Paul de Métis had a real significant impact on his later life, and you'll see that as well. Members of Brady's family were very vocal advocates of Métis identity and social equality. Brady, of course, was self educated in history and politics. According to those close to him, Brady was also fluent in Cree, Michif, English, and French, and he also spoke some German, Spanish, and also knew Latin. And in the late 1920s, while he was working as a laborer, he really adopted Marxist philosophies and considered himself a communist. And along with fellow Métis leaders, Felix Kellu, Joe Dion, Peter Tompkins, Malcolm Frederick Norris. Brady helped to politically organize the Métis in Alberta during the 1930s. And at that particular time, people often called them the Big Five or the Fabulous Five. Brady played a real vital role in the formation of the Métis Association of Alberta, which is now the Métis Nation of Alberta and the Alberta Métis settlements. In 1933, the Métis Association of Alberta had roughly around 1,200 members in 41 locals, and its priority was to really lobby the government to improve the social and economic conditions of Métis and non-status Indian people in that province. And Brady and his allies urged the provincial government to study their living conditions, and due to their intense lobbying, the government of Alberta appointed the Royal Ewing Commission in 1934 to hear the testimony and make recommendations regarding the poverty, health problems, and the lack of education of the Métis people in that particular province. And during the hearings, Brady served as an instrumental political strategic. He was really strategist, and his lobbying helped bring about the Alberta government's passage of the Métis Population Betterment Act in 1938, which gave Métis people in Alberta tracts of land and social welfare programs. So that was very, at that particular time in 1938, that was very important that Métis people in Alberta tracts of land and, of course, social welfare programs. And when the Second World War broke out, we all know that that was a very uh, hard time on many families in Canada having war break out. The Canadian Armed Forces initially refused Jim Brady. They refused him to go into the army again. Here we go again, folks, because of his communist affiliations. So instead, he continued his active involvement in the Communist Party of Canada and the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, also known as CCF, involvement that had begun in the 1930s. 1941, he supervised the government sponsored and short lived Wolf Lake Métis colony. In 1943, Brady was accepted finally into the Army and joined the war efforts overseas, boarding a troop ship bound for England in October. And during his military service, he really kept a detailed diary of his wartime experiences. And it's kind of fascinating to read any type of wartime diary on listing the experiences that the troops went through. And here's something fascinating as well. Did you know while at Wolf Lake Métis Colony in 1941 and at Cumberland House, Saskatchewan in 1949, Brady began to create a visual record of Métis life. And I think at that particular time, in that date in 1941 and 1949, to really get a perspective and to see visually the life of Métis people and to record that, I think that was just spectacular. And and an amateur photographer, he took portraits of Métis people living and working around these settlements. And this included women in fields and men in work clothes or uniforms. And Brady was always included the subject's name, the date and place, and sometimes birthplace on the particular photo. So that's really creating a new archive of Métis identity at a time when most Métis appeared in government script records solely by their family name, and very important again at that particular moment in time. And today it's fascinating and it's so impressive that hundreds of Brady's images are archived at the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, Alberta. And following uh, his time in the Second World War, Brady worked for the Department of Natural Resources as a conservation officer, prospected and helped establish resource cooperatives in the fish, timber, and fur industries, and really primary located in the regions of northern Saskatchewan and in Alberta. And after the war again, when Brady relocated to the Métis settlement of Deschambault Lake, Saskatchewan, he became a field officer at the government trading post and supervised local fishermen. And from the time period of 1948 to 1951, he lived at the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation run site, Cumberland House in Saskatchewan. However, by the early 1950s, he had grown, disillusioned with the Federation. It's kind of lost its charm, and he really lost interest in that. And in 1951, Brady moved to La Ronge in northern Saskatchewan, where he lived in a log cabin lined with scholarly books. And throughout his life, Brady passionately studied history and politics and sought equal rights for the Métis. So here is a Métis leader that is really studying history and sought equal rights for the Métis, and at particular this time period in 1951. So those are, early on days. And Brady told an interviewer in 1960s, and I quote, "They," and he's referring to the Métis, "must be freed of the disabilities which colonialism has imposed upon them." End of quote. And that quotation really says a lot during that time period, that we must, and colonialism surely is a disability, and it has been imposed on the Métis people. And at a 1963 CCF convention, he tried unsuccessfully to bring the degree of Indigenous suffering in the North to leader Tommy Douglas's attention. So it fell on deaf ears at that particular time. And that must have been really frustrating to try and advocate and to really bring and showcase the degree of Indigenous suffering and to have it fall on deaf ears. And with Malcolm Frederick Norris, Jim Brady helped found the Métis Association of Saskatchewan and was a key organizer of the association's La Ronge local. And that particular local today is known as the Jim Brady Local 19 for Métis community members. And the organization's goal, and any organization, their goal is very important. And this goal in 1965 was to, and I quote, to organize people of Indian ancestry in the province of Saskatchewan to secure recognition for and realization of our hopes and aspirations towards a better way of life, consistent with the opportunities available within Canadian society. End of quote. Very important. And in his final years, Jim Brady gave up organizing large projects and focusing on local harm reduction and education in the Larange area region. And this, to me, is where the story gets horrific. And it took me long to sort of even grasp the concept of this happening. And it's the beginning of the unsolved, mysterious disappearance. And like I said, it took me a long time to grasp the horrific circumstances of what transpired. And Jim Brady and his Cree friend, and I'll call him Abbie Halkett, a Lac Larange band counselor, went prospecting in June 7th, 1967, in northern Saskatchewan by Lower Foster Lake, with their camp on shore and canoes in the water. And both men vanished, completely vanished into thin air, almost uh, like the Bermuda Triangle. There was a Bermuda Triangle up there, and they just completely vanished. And this part is alleged, and you're going to hear a lot of the term alleged in this particular segment of the program. And nothing was ever proven, and the incident sparked very controversial speculations that he was assassinated. And I know that's a very, very heavy word, but he was assassinated and alleged for his political activities, for having a strong voice, for speaking out for Métis rights. And this so reminds me of the Jimmy Hoffa, who disappeared under circumstances that have never been fully determined. And this is how it is with this particular case in regarding Brady and Halkett, that the circumstances have never been fully determined to this day. And of course, Jim Brady was one of the, at that particular time, Jim Brady was one of the most famous Indigenous Métis activists in Canada. And Jim Brady and Halkett are people that are remembered by their family and community, but not all Canadians remember them, and that needs to be remedied. And both Brady and Halkett were, this is how the story goes, were dropped off by a plane at Foster Lake, Saskatchewan, which is located 120 miles northwest of Larange, Saskatchewan. And they were last heard of on a radio call to a nearby mine on June 8th. And extensive land, air, and water searches of the area failed to locate any trace of the two men. So there was completely not one single trace of these two men done by any land, air, or water searches. And their camp was located, but it appeared that the camp had been totally unused. So you set up a camp, you get dropped off, you set up a camp, but it's unused? I mean, if nobody finds that weird, I mean, there's something really, really going on with this here. And for me, as a historian, researcher, this is where the story really takes a wicked turn and really gets interesting and really gets gut wrenching. And a particular Sergeant CKG Conrad of Gull Lake Detachment was the commanding officer of the Larange detachment in 1967 when Brady and Halkett disappeared, and he headed the search for the two men. And apparently, the search lasted 3 weeks. And he was interviewed August 20th, 1976, by a Murray Dobbin. And I had to go over and over the transcripts because of some of the things that I had read in there. It was just totally outer space, and I just couldn't grasp it. And here are some of the items that are located in that particular interview. And as per Conrad, he stated that they did a brief air search on the first day. And his perspective is he thought maybe they had been dropped off in the wrong location, and apparently a dog search was done the next day, and specified that the terrain in that particular area for walking was easy for walking, and there was an attempt to make a raft. To me, make a raft? Okay, that seems really, really odd. Why would you make a raft? Why? The question indeed is why. And apparently, according to Conrad, charges were being detonated at Rottenstone Mine every hour on the hour. And apparently, according to the interview, the raft idea really failed as the raft was still sitting there. And the mention of dull axes, this word dull is very, very important. And Geiger counters, apparently they had Geiger counters on them, but they were never found. And this, you'll see a mention of this again as well, and this might be key in my personal opinion. Two guides, and in this interview, he mentioned Cooks out of Stanley Mission, and he also mentions Ben McKenzie. And they were waiting for a tourist party to come in, and it was mentioned in the interview as well. Did the guides have firearms? And here's a quote from Conrad in this particular same interview. Oh, I would think. I can't recall, but I've never ever seen an Indian go into the bush without a 22. And I end of quote of that. And rumors in the area that Ben or the younger fellow had said that they had, this is alleged, they had shot two men. And I'm going to go into a little bit of what this is, a little bit in more into the particular transcript. And this is about the interview here. And they're talking about various evidence, and talking about the search party and all that here. And it says, and this is what Clyde said and Conrad said, and I quote, and like they were supposed to have been shot on the edge of a cliff and fell into the lake or something, but end of quote. And the interviewer is saying there is no cliff around there, and Conrad Clyde is saying the same thing. So the interviewer is saying, and I quote, right, so you treated the story basically as the kind of thing that naturally comes out of a disappearance in the north. And Conrad Clyde is saying, and I quote, yeah, right. And the interviewer is asking him, and I quote, was there any consideration of investigating that at all? End of quote. And this is where the officer says, I quote, no. it was discounted when we found the evidence that they had been at a point is supposed to be at La Pointe or La Pointe, and they go into talking that, talking more about what had been found and going into the interview as well. And I had a lot of problems with this particular interview for a lot of reasons, and it didn't sit well. And again, the officer Conrad is treating the story like the kind of thing that he's just saying that this is the kind of thing that just comes out of disappearance, that people just are adding input, and well, that's the kind of thing that comes out of a disappearance. So what kind of BS is that? And when I mean BS, I mean BS. And so here's another quote again from that particular same interview. So once you in your own mind confirmed that the raft had been made by them, how can you confirm that a raft had been made by them? And that post that pretty much eliminated the possibility of them being done in by foul play. You know what? I couldn't believe it. My rage when I read this. The interviewer is saying that uh, once this Conrad, this officer in charge, had in his own mind, how can you confirm in your own bloody mind that the raft had been made by them? So if you make a raft, then you pretty much eliminate the possibility of them being done in by foul play. And this is what the officer Conrad said, and I quote, "Oh yeah, right." End of quote. What the? You can only imagine my rage to having the officer in charge of the search say that. And these two men knew the bush well. I mean, what Indigenous Métis person is not bush savvy? I mean, can you see a problem with all this? I mean, it just blows my mind that somebody can say that. And I'm going to read a bit more of this interview with Conrad as well, or Clyde, as whatever you want to. And this is particular. This is page 10 of this particular transcript, and they're talking about Clyde, or Conrad is saying that he says, and I quote, "But again, Brady was a kind of an oddball type. He had a mind of his own. I think he probably said, to hell with everybody, and he would just damn well do what he wanted to do and start walking out himself." End of quote. And I mean, for an officer to say that, I mean, I don't understand it. And here he goes on again, this officer as well, and I quote, "No, no, I don't know. I didn't know Brady." Well, so the previous statement before is that he said he's calling Brady an oddball type. And then two lines down, or two segments down, he said, "No, no, no, I didn't know Brady that well, but you knew him well enough to call him an oddball type." I mean, get it together. And this is the lead officer in charge. I just don't understand. I mean, I had so many problems reading this particular interview with this officer in charge that I had to stop reading after a while because I couldn't believe the audacity. And they also, in further in that interview, they talk about the possibility of a bear attack. And of course, they're talking about, in another aspect of this, they're talking about, and here is another key concept as well, is the aspect of fire. If you're in a bush to call attention to yourself, you're going to make a bloody fire. And again, uh, they're asking, the officer is saying, "Well, Halkett smoked, I'm sure. I don't know if Brady did." Yeah, Brady smoked. So here he is in the same bloody sentence. This officer in charge is saying, I didn't know if Brady did. Yeah, Brady smoked because I remember he used to walk around with a butt hanging out of his mouth. No, they both smoked. So they should have had matches with them. So the officer is agreeing that they should have had matches source of making fire, and of course, probably a pouch of tobacco. And they go on to talk about the assumption about the lack of evidence of any type of fire. And the officer says again, and I quote, "I don't know, for two people involved, they certainly didn't use their head." So this officer, Conrad Clyde or whatever, had said many, many times that he didn't know Brady that well, but then he's making the assumption that they certainly, for the two people involved, they didn't use their head. And of course, this officer, again, like I said, I've had so many problems with this officer mentioning again this bloody raft, and he seems to again thinks he knows Brady, and then he changes halfway through the thing. There, he doesn't know Brady. So there were so many problems with this interview with this officer. Again, like I've told you, I had to stop reading because I was just getting so filled with rage. And also in the June 14th, 1976 Barry Richards interview, and I quote, "One of the greatest mysteries of the whole thing is again the fact that they did not make an attempt to attract attention to themselves." End of quote. And again, it was mentioned, and I quote, "There were aircraft over the area over all of northern Saskatchewan very regularly." End of quote. And here we have that mention again. And this is key, key, key. And I quote, "does not explain why they didn't try to light a fire." End of quotation. So if you're stranded in the bush somewhere, the first thing you're going to do is attempt to light a fire to draw attention to yourself. There was no evidence of a fire. And also in the 1976 interview with Jacob Mackenzie, who was a trapper and a bushman, uh, he uh, feels that the trapper made the raft and not Brady. So here we talk about this raft, and says the raft was made in springtime before ice went out, and says that they couldn't have been killed by bears. We had mentioned that the possibility of an accident, being attacked by a bear, what have you. And this is key, folks. It's been alleged, and I quote, "Just somebody must have come around there, one of those trappers, and shot him and put him in the lake." End of quote. And another quote is, "When they come home in the timber area, they found the tent and somebody saw them right there." And we're assuming they're talking about their bodies, saw them right there when they're coming down from the timber area. And of course, this is alleged, folks, they got shot, and then that fellow saw them and put them in the lake. End of quote. And here's something key as we kind of try and digest this mysterious disappearance, that it just, after you look at all the information and the various inconsistencies in the interview, did the pilot put them down in the wrong bloody place? Is that even an option? That even plausible? And this is key again. Why did they not attempt to make a fire to draw attention to themselves, to try and get help? Apparently, there was planes flying all over the area. They would have seen a fire. Forest fires are to be reported. And Jim, of course, was a very, very intelligent person, having been in the Second World War. I mean, you would have survival techniques, and I don't know too many Métis or Indigenous people that are not bush savvy. And Jim knew Halkett very well, and Halkett was a bushman of wide experience. And somebody had made the assumption or the idea that maybe both of them had drowned, and really the likelihood of the two of them drowning again is very unlikely. And in the August 21st, 1976 interview with Alan Quond, here's another quote. I quote, knowing the two men, I would say that they're panicking to be very, very unlikely, end of quote. So he's saying that he highly unlikely that the two men would go into panic mode, getting lost, disoriented, turned around. And the two men were alleged uh, were on the same lake. So there were two men that were allegedly on the same lake as the two individuals, and the RCMP dismissed this as unimportant. So you have two individuals, you have Brady and you have Halkett that go missing, and there's two other men that were allegedly in the same vicinity, same lake, and here you have the RCMP just deciding, dismissing that it's unimportant. Based on what? I mean, give me a break here. And again, it's been alleged political intrigue may have played a role in Brady's sudden departure from this world. And of course, rumors circulated about secret mining interests in the area where the two men were prospecting. I mean, you're talking about mines, big dollar amounts, and some have even gone so far to allege that the police investigation misconduct, it was just completely botched. And in my personal opinion, if the interview with the officer that I'm talking about, Clyde Conrad, is any indication, good grief. I mean, one sentence you're saying something, two sentences down, you're contradicting yourself. It's just a hot mess. You can't even, you just lose your track in that particular interview. And Brady led Métis and First Nations to really rebel against the government and church oppression. So when you have an individual that is telling or leading Métis people and First Nations to take a rebel stance against the government and church oppression, they become a very powerful figure. And Brady's success made politicians and the clergy really fear him, and he was an adversary. And another mention was official indifference to Indigenous knowledge. And there's also an alleged theory that Brady and Halkett's two business partners killed them after they discovered a huge, big uranium find. And at the time of the disappearance, a fishing guide, and just wrap your head around this, a fishing guide and a U.S. tourist found a body with tied wrists near the lake where Brady and Halkett were last seen. And guess what? They didn't report it. So okay, you find a body with tied wrists near a lake where there's two missing men and you just don't report it? Okay, I mean, if you don't think there's something wrong with not reporting it, I mean, give me a break. And in July 2018, there was a search team that came across what they believed could be the men's remains in the northeast corner of Lower Foster Lake with the assistance of Grandmother's Bay Search and Rescue's underwater sonar vehicle. And they took pictures and videos of an area which revealed what had been termed as, and I quote, an unnatural anomalies, end of quote. And here we go again with the authorities. The RCMP did not believe that the no information was enough to warrant a deep dive and more detailed inspection of the particular area. And July 10th, 2011, a stone memorial dedicated to the memory and contributions made by Jim Brady to the Métis community and Saskatchewan heritage was unveiled in front of the Kiknak Friendship Center in Larange during Jim Brady days. And as we know, we said previously that his photography of Métis people in everyday life, showcasing their empty everyday life, was very pivotal, very important. And it's nice to see that on August 4th, 2020, a museum in Calgary was showcasing the photographs of James Brady, and also June 29th of this year, 2022, um, they his work was highlighted at Battleford's show in North Battleford. So he's finally getting the recognition for his photography, which is very, very important. And this is very, very important uh, that Brady spent again his entire life fighting for and working for the Métis people. He helped bring a sense of pride and ability to a people who had, in some ways, been politically dormant for over 50 years. And his legacy lives on, and it's really up to the contemporary Métis organizations to really build on that and to make space for those who come after us to do the same. And Brady believed that Métis people should enjoy the same rights as all Canadians and be viewed for the contributions to Canadian society. And both Brady and Halkett deserve justice, as do their families. They deserve truth about their mysterious disappearance. And this is a true Metis Cold Case that deserves to be solved, and we deserve to hear the truth on what really happened to these men. And let's be honest, the two men had to have met some sort of dramatic incident, and the time of year and the ample water made it very unlikely that they would have perished in less than 2 weeks. And after reading various documents in regards to the interviews that went through, in regards to interviewing various people, interviewing the police that were in charge of this investigation, which in my personal opinion was just botched, so many inconsistencies, just not even making sense. And in Brady's demise, that was written or by Murray Dobbin, I'm posing the question. They actually put an individual's name, but since the case remains unsolved, they refer to this person as X, and I'm really wondering who this X is. There was various theories in regards to Brady being murdered. This is alleged as well, being murdered. But I really think that Jim Brady was a very remarkable person, that his story needs to be told, and the disappearance of these two individuals needs to be solved. Jim Brady and his Cree friend, Abbie Halkett, were prospecting in June 7th, 1967, never to be seen again, completely vanished. And again, this certainly is a Métis Indigenous cold case that needs, the truth is out there, folks. And I think Brady Halkett, the communities, their family members certainly deserve the truth on what happened to them. And my thoughts and prayers with the family that the truth and justice is served in regards to the remarkable achievements in regards to Brady and what he's really done for the Métis people. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining me on another segment of Métis Time Capsule. Until next time, take care, folks, and thank you.